Good morning. It's good to be here this morning. Good to see each one of you. We're going to be in Acts 23 this morning. Acts chapter 23. If you want to be turning there, I will tell you that my family is in the mountains this morning for the annual girls trip. And yes, Callan and Paxton go, but we still call it that. The time will come when they probably won't go, and so you'll see them hanging out with me, but they are all well. I talked to them this morning. They're an hour ahead of us, so they were headed to church this morning and got to talk to them. And so that's where they are, and I'm flying solo and I'm hungry. So if you know anybody, I'm kidding. One thing I'm not is hungry, right? You can tell that by looking at me. Acts 23, we are... I want to say I'm looking for a church, but I'm really looking for people who understand and value, who appreciate and recognize the presence of God. Acts 23 is about recognizing that God is present. We've heard the verse all of our lives where two or three are gathered together, there I am. Jesus actually says that in Matthew 18, in the midst of working out a problem or an issue with a brother or sister. But we use that to apply, and okay, fine, I'm not going to fuss about it, but understand that in the context it's about working out an issue, and Jesus says, when two or three of you are gathered to take on a conflict and to resolve it, in a godly way, then I'll be there in the midst of you, to which we've then come through the years and said, when we gather for worship, or when we gather, in a small group Bible study, or God's there in the midst of us. I'm not denying that at all. Don't misunderstand me. I'm actually pointing out that we think of it very commonly in this setting, or in a setting similar to this. How often do we think about the presence of God when we go to work? How real is the presence of God in our lives when we are traveling down the road? How much thought and attention do we give to the fact that God is always with us? God is always present. God is always near. In Bible class this morning, David Killen was contrasting the eternal dwelling places of the soul. And one of the things that was mentioned about hail from 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 9 is that hail is when God comes to take vengeance upon those who do not obey Him, there will be eternal punishment. 2 Thessalonians 1 and verse 9 says, and they will be separated from the presence of the Lord. And so this morning in Bible class, we emphasize how hell is a separation from the presence of the Lord. Now think about this with me for just a moment. Micah, I'd love to say more in Bible class, but I just let you, okay? Because I hold it for here, all right? Think about this. The atheists today live in the presence of God, refusing to accept the presence of God, to die to go to an eternal place where they can't contact the presence of God. Now just put all that into your sandwich bag and chew on it. They refuse, though they're living. Let's be honest, you can't get away from the presence of God today. You live in a world where God's presence is all around you. Whether you acknowledge it or not doesn't change the fact that He's here, that He's real, that He's alive, that He's working, that He's moving, and that things are happening because of the presence of God. It's just a fact of reality. Now, you get to choose, and so do I, whether we're going to acknowledge that or accept that. And what I'm admitting to you is that the atheist has refused to accept it, though they be living in it. Which is kind of I love this word, oxymoron, right? I didn't call them a name. You better hear me clearly. That is an oxymoron, okay? But when they die, if they choose to continue in that disobedient belief of theirs, when they die, your Bible, my Bible, says that they will find themselves in an eternal place that is separated, or the very absence of the presence of God. And if I understand it correctly, there's only one place where God is not present, and that is it. That is in the eternal place of hell. God's presence is not there, but everywhere else it is. And so what is it about the presence of God that we need to understand and appreciate? Well, let's talk about the context of Acts 23 for a moment. We're in Paul's defense here. I don't want you to accuse me of using something out of context. I know what the context is. It starts back in chapter 22 and verse 30. On the next day, they wanted to understand Paul better, so they unbound him. They've got him arrested, and they let him loose in order to go about and to give his defense. And so he begins in chapter 23 by giving his defense. And he makes a very interesting comment in verse 1. I've lived in all good conscience, even to this day. Even when I was persecuting the church, Acts 23 and verse 1. I was doing it in good conscience. Now let me tell you why I was wrong. And he proceeds then from verse 1 to say, though I was doing it in good conscience, my conscience was wrong. And here's what I was doing, and here's what I shouldn't have been doing, and here's what I decided I would replace that with, thanks to that intervention on the road to Damascus in Acts chapter 9. And so he tells them this, and you drop down to verse 10 for time's sake, and when the dissension became violent. Here Paul is. He's telling his story. He's just giving them the facts of what has happened. I mean, to the Sanhedrin, to the chief priest, to all of the Jewish leaders. Let me just tell you who I am. I was living like this, and I thought it was right, and I learned better, and now I've changed my behavior, and I'm doing better, and you need to change your behavior and accept the Christ, and it becomes violent. Here's a man who is just trying to lovingly help these people out of the religious error that they're living in, and they're getting mad. I know you're not surprised by that, but that's the context. They get so mad that the tribune is afraid that they are going to rip Paul to pieces, verse 10. And so they say, take him away. Take him away. And by force they take him away and they put him in prison. They put him back into the barrack. We've heard enough. We've heard all we want to hear. Take him away. He's going to be killed here. They're getting so mad and so angry. They're going to rip him to pieces. Get him out of here. So they do. They get him out of there. You come down to verse 12. Now this is serious business here. It is so serious that in verse 12 they decide they will neither eat nor drink until he's dead. Now that's a lot of anger, ain't it? There's not many things that's going to cause me to miss a meal, you understand? But they decide it is so important, Paul has got to die. And it is so important that he dies that we're not even going to stop to eat or drink. We're not going to let anything else get into our minds or consume our thinking until he's dead. So they set out on this plot in verse 12 to kill him. They come up with this plan to get rid of Paul. The problem is in verse 16, Paul's got a nephew, apparently. His sister's got a boy. And his nephew is informed about their plan or their plot to kill Paul. And so what's going to happen is, and you can read Acts 23, what's going to happen is Paul's going to go up to continue his defense, and when he gets up into the court, they are going to ambush him from behind and take his life. And his nephew hears them talking about that, and so he goes to give warning to Paul. Paul, you can't go. They're gonna hide out and they're gonna ambush you. And so Paul says, hey, you need to go tell somebody before they bring me up in the morning before the council again, and they get to execute this plan by executing my life. And so he does. And you read verses 17, 18, 19. The tribune takes him, and he tells them, verse 20, what's going to happen. And then finally they, verse 22, dismiss the young man. Don't tell anyone what you've told us. And then verse 23, the tribune basically engages another plan to help Paul escape the ambush. And so Paul gets out of there without dying. And so we have this beginning of the chapter that leads Paul into this very violent situation that causes him to be put back into prison. Now back in prison, Paul's life is being planned out by others. His nephew comes to his rescue. He goes to the tribune. Thankfully, they listen to him. And they engage the centurions and others and basically move Paul safely around as a prisoner from the ambush. Now, what does that have to do with the presence of God? Well, there's a lot it could have to do with it, right? Well, where do you think Paul is right now? I don't mean literally. He's in prison, right? But here he is, standing to defend the truth, and he's made people so mad they want to rip his limbs off his body. Can you imagine? Now here he is in prison, finding himself still being persecuted for trying to do what's right. Here's a man who once put people in prison for being Christians, and now he's in prison for being a Christian himself. The coin has completely flipped, hasn't it? Imagine what's going through his mind, what's in his heart, what's next, what's going to happen. Now his nephew comes and says, hey, uncle, they're going to kill you. And obviously it's a plausible idea that could very likely happen the very next morning. In Acts 23 and verse 11, you might have noticed I skipped it, because that's where the presence of God comes in. Acts 23 and verse 11, the following night. Now, why wait till the next night, right? That's my question. You don't get to ask it. I'm asking it. Why wait till the next night? I don't know. But obviously Paul had to struggle with this for a day. And the next night, the Lord stands by him and says. I want you to think about the Lord. And by the way, it's not all capitalized here. So I do believe the red letters are accurate. If you have red letters, I do believe that it is Jesus referred to as the Lord here. Jesus comes in to stand by his side. I think about the opportunity for comfort. Here's a man who is in prison. Here's a man trying to defend the cause of Jesus. And all of a sudden, in this prison cell, he has the opportunity of Jesus standing at his side. Standing by his side. Well, it's not the first time. If you just take your finger and flip back to chapter 18, it's already happened. Chapter 18, Paul's at Corinth. Verse 9, the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision. Again, Lord is not all capitalized. Do not be afraid, but go on speaking, and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people. In Acts 18, Paul thought, I'm going to die here in Corinth, and Jesus says, no. You go on speaking. In that vision, he comes to his side. What a comfort. Paul says, I'm going to be killed in Corinth, and Jesus says, no, I have many in this city. You carry on with what you're doing. Just the last Sunday in Acts 22, beginning in verse 17 and going through verse 21, Paul falls into this trance in Jerusalem. And in the midst of this trance, the Lord says, make haste and get out of Jerusalem, because they will not accept your testimony about me. Verse 18. In verse 21, and the Lord said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. So this is the third time, not counting the road to Damascus and what took place there. But the Lord has come to his side. Now for the third time in an effort to comfort. In an effort to provide assurance. In an effort to strengthen and to bring hope. And notice what he says in Acts 23 and verse 11. Take courage. King James Version says, be of good cheer. Take courage. Be of good cheer. He would say that to the disciples in Matthew 14 and verse 27 when he walked on the water. And they were terrified. Oh no, it's a ghost. And Jesus speaks out from the water in Matthew 14 and verse 27 and says, take heart, or be of good cheer. Do not be afraid. It is I. Take heart. Be of good cheer. The authors of Hebrews say in Hebrews 4 and verse 15, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with us, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Take heart. Take courage. Be of good cheer. Paul, I understand what you're going through. You see, the presence of God comes to Paul in order to comfort him, to console him. But then notice what he goes on to say in verse 11 of Acts 23. For as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem. For as you have testified, Jesus says, I asked you to do that. I wanted you to do that. And you did so. I gave you a commandment, if you will. And he says in John 15:14, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And so he says to Paul, the presence of God comes to Paul in a accommodating to commend him for what he has done. Was it easy? Absolutely not. This man put his life at risk in Jerusalem. Why? Because he'd been in Jerusalem working for the Judaizers. Now he's going to go to Jerusalem, or he has been going to Jerusalem, to work for the Christ. His very well-being, his health, his life at risk. But Jesus says, Paul, I'm proud of you because you have testified of the facts about me in Jerusalem. Sometimes the presence of God comes to commend us, to say, I'm proud of you. To say, I ask you to do something and you've done it. I ask you to be a servant. I ask you to give of yourself. And you did. I'm proud of you. Good job. Thank you, Paul, for being the servant I needed you to be in Jerusalem. But he doesn't stop there in Acts 23 and verse 11. He finishes by saying, so you must also testify of me in Rome. Now we know from other passages that Paul really wanted to go to Rome. He really wanted to get to Rome, and I would suggest to you, I'm inferring this, But I would suggest to you that at this point in his life, he's thinking, not going to happen. I mean, after all, they're going to set up an ambush in the morning, and they're going to take his life. I'm not getting to Rome. I really want to go to Rome, but I'm not going to get to go to Rome. And the presence of God intervenes here and says, makes a promise, yeah, Paul, you'll go to Rome. Paul, you will be my witness in Rome. Now, for a man who wants to go to Rome, and for a man who has, in my opinion, lost hope of getting there, well, this is a great confirmation. You see, sometimes the presence of God comes in to confirm that God is still in control, right? It comes in to remind us that, hey, though you think it's this way, God's saying, no, it's really that way. When we have times in our lives that we lose hope, we lose confidence, we lose trust, we lose faith, it might just be at those times that God's presence comes in and says, don't give up. Paul, you're going to Rome. And you're not just going to go to Rome, but in order to be a witness, you've got to be alive, right? So, Paul, you're going to be alive when you get to Rome. Now, what he don't tell him is how he's going to get there. And by the way, if I had to go the way he's going to have to go, I'd just assume not go. The voyage ain't going to be fun, you understand. But he's going to go. He didn't tell him what he was going to have to endure in order to get to Rome. But we know from reading the end of the book of Acts, it's pretty rough. But the confidence, Paul never doubts the promise that God has made. You're going to go to Rome. Even in the midst of a storm that is tearing the ship apart and they are all literally fearing for their lives, Paul's going to have confidence. Why? Because of Acts 23 and verse 11. On this night in prison, the presence of God confirmed that he was going to Rome. And he never doubted that. Now, what is it that you and I need from the presence of God? Sometimes we need assurance, don't we? 1 John 5 and verse 14, the Bible says, we can know this with confidence, that if we ask anything within his will, he hears us. We can have confidence in that. We can have assurance in that. 1 John 5 and verse 13, I write these things that you might know that you have life eternal. Assurance, confidence, that if we ask anything according to his will, what do we need from the presence of God? Not just assurance, but I believe we could benefit from trying to understand the providence of God. Look at God moving through Acts 23. Paul's supposed to die the next morning. They have got a bulletproof plan. The only problem is they don't have a God-proof plan. Their plan's perfect. They're going to take this guy out. The only problem is it ain't God-proof. And God intervenes by providence through the nephew. I understand it's all happening in human body, vessels, form, and this conversation and this conversation. But don't tell me God ain't working. There's nothing miraculous going on here. I get that. And there's nothing miraculous going on today, but don't tell me God ain't working. Because that's a lie. God is working. His providence still is real and true. God will intervene. God can intervene. God has intervened. And it may be that we don't see it till hindsight, right? Foresight's better than hindsight, but insight's the best of all, right? How about we get a little insight into the providence of God? See, we need that. We need to understand that better. I'm not suggesting we'll understand it fully, But to be able to read Scripture and watch God move and work, and to think that God ain't still moving in some way today, He absolutely is. We need God's assurance. We need God's providence. Because here's the reality. I'm looking at some eyes that need comforting. That's what you need today. Life is hard. Life is difficult. Life is not fair right now for you. And I'm not asking you to spill all that out. I'm just telling you that I understand that it's real, it's here, and there's people going through it. Marriages are struggling. Homes are in shambles. Health is in the pits. Finances are boiling over the top. What we need is, we need comfort. We need to know that God still cares. Well, we need to know that God is still alive. We need to know that God still hears and feels and cares about. Cast all your cares upon Him. What care does that leave out? Sometimes we need God to come and say, take courage. Be of good cheer. No, I'm not suggesting what's going on is good. Because of the presence of God. If you just wait until Sunday, man, you're wasting a lot of days, aren't you? I mean, if you're only looking for the presence of God one day a week, man, the other 6 are just wasted. Because He's there. And He wants to comfort you in all 7 of them. I realized this morning that I'm looking at some eyes that need to hear, you're doing a good job. Keep it up. I'm looking at some eyes that need older women to say to some of you younger women, it's hard to raise children, but you're doing a good job. And you need to feel God that way through the older women. And I'm looking at some older men that need to take the time to say to some younger men, discipline and nurture and leading your home is very challenging. And you won't make the right decisions all the time. But I'm confident that you, with God's help, can do a good job. Keep doing a good job. I'm looking at some younger men and women who need to go up to an older man or woman and say thank you. Appreciate who you are. You're an encouragement to me. That's the presence of God commending the work of His children. He says to Paul, Paul, you have been a witness for me in Jerusalem. Thank you. I'm proud of what you've done. And then I'm also confident that I'm looking at some eyeballs this morning that need to know that God is going to be there tomorrow. You may not be, but He's going to be. Right? And while you can't decide whether you will be or not, what you know is that if you are, He'll be there with you. That's all that matters, isn't it? I don't know whether I will be tomorrow or not, but as long as I know the Lord will be there if I get there, then I'm good with getting there. That's the confirmation that I need. You just need to know that God still has a plan. God still has a purpose. God still has a vision for mine and your life. Just like He did for Paul. Paul, I can't wait till you get to Rome so you can be my witness in Rome. And it might just be this morning that God is saying, I really got some big things in store for you. He's trying to confirm His presence in your life. But here's the problem. You ain't looking for it. We're too busy looking for everything else or for something else. I'm looking for a people this morning I'm looking for a church this morning that is focused on the presence of God. In whatever way you might need the presence of God in your life this morning, that you would accept His desire to be present in your life. It is His desire. It is His wishes. But it's also your choice to let Him in or not. That's the power you have. So I'm asking you this morning to let Him in. He wants to be present in your life. Let Him. Lovingly and tenderly, He's calling to your soul, wanting in. If He's not already in, would you let Him? Would you obediently come, accepting the salvation that He offers, to be His child and to be consumed by His presence? If we can help assist you in that, we invite you as we stand and sing.